What are you doing here, you puffer?
I'm just out for a walk, mate.
Oh, come on. Yeah, give us your money.
Hey, honey.
Give us your wallet.
I don't have
Come
any
on.
money.
Get him, put him on the ground.
Come on, give it up, Paul.
Take that, you big bag.
Oh, you mincing prick. On his head! On his head! Get his head! Take that! Oh, yeah! Yeah! Oh, you fucker! Dirty bag! Got him! Kill the faggot!
Cool again tomorrow with the heavier rain clearing down south. The lighter showers will continue.
In 1988, Ross Warren was a 25-year-old and a favourite of TV audiences in Wollongong, south of Sydney, where he presented news and weather reports on Win TV.
Good afternoon, I'm Ross Warren. 80
very soft, lovely person. Just, wore his heart on his sleeve. Joker. Loved to muck around on camera, or even off camera. Like the red nose days, and he'd be the first with the red nose on and find out later whether he was allowed to wear it or not, but he'd have it.
Wollongong's own resident weatherman, Ross Warren. Hi, Ross.
And that was Ross Warren. He was keen to try things. He loved to be a larrikin on air.
Next, Brian Henderson presents all the latest in National 9 News.
And he had this spontaneous smile, these bright eyes, good-looking, slim, trendy, always had that sort of college boy next-door look, and had the most delightful personality, so that he'd light up a room.
Ross Warren's ready smile and larrikin humour had been noticed by network programmers in Sydney, and he was ready to make the move to the big time.
And in those days, the ultimate was to go to Sydney and become a national personality. And that's what Ross had his sights set on.
While he had a high public profile, Ross's private life was just that, private. He was gay, but it was the 1980s. Although homosexuality had been decriminalised in New South Wales, prejudice was still widespread.
I think he may have been a little guarded at times because of his position with television. It was back in the 80s, of course, so there was still a lot of homophobia around, and I think he had to look after himself in that regard.
I guess being in the public eye, you do like to have a little bit of your life that nobody knows about. But in Ross's case, he definitely kept it hidden. And again in those days, and I think probably to a lesser extent today, but it still goes on, your sexuality, unfortunately, you are judged often in our business.
On weekends, Ross often drove north to Sydney, where he could relax anonymously in the gay scene and be himself. On Friday, the 21st of July 1989, he set off for just such a weekend. He was staying as usual with a good mate, Craig Ellis, at a house in the inner city suburb of Redfern.
He had a few mates up here in Sydney, but because he'd travelled around a lot, lived in a few different places, he didn't have a big network of friends. But I was probably one of his closest friends, I think.
After leaving his luggage at Craig's place, Ross headed for the gay bars of Oxford Street, where he'd arranged to meet up with a workmate named Philip.
Ross wasn't a big drinker. He wasn't somebody, what we'd call now a binge drinker. He would have a few drinks. He would usually break up those beers or those spirits with mineral water.
About 2 a.m, Ross said goodnight to Philip and drove off.
As Philip was driving away, he noticed that instead of turning right back towards the Redfern area, Ross was in fact going left in the direction of Bondi. At that time he thought that was strange because Ross had made no mention of going anywhere else. In fact, he'd said he was going straight home, he was tired. So he did make a note of that, but then just dismissed it.
Arriving at the end of Bondi Beach, Ross parked his car and walked into Marks Park. At night, this park was well known as a beat, a secluded place where homosexual men meet. Here, in the early hours of Saturday morning, this lonely young man with the secret life hoped to find, in the darkness, another like himself.
Marks Park has been a gay beat for probably 60 or 70 years. There have been records of it being a place where men have met for sex, casual sex, dating back to the 1930s. It now attracts hundreds and hundreds of people on a good sunny weekend, and it's one of Sydney's tourist attractions. And but at night, it's quite a different place. It takes on a very different atmosphere at night.
Ross walked into the darkness, never to be seen again.
He didn't turn up the next morning, and we were a little concerned because it wasn't in his nature to stay out. But we thought possibly he'd met someone and hooked up with them and gone back to their place. So we were a little concerned, but this was back in the days before friends kept in touch with mobile phones, and it wasn't completely out of the question that he might have stayed out and not let us know what was happening.
It wasn't until later on Saturday, when he'd arranged to meet up with friends, that they were certain something was wrong.
He was rarely, if ever, late, and if he was running late, he would always give the courtesy of letting people know that he was running late.
And he was going to meet up with us, myself and a group of friends, on Oxford Street, outside of the Oxford on Taylor Square, as I recall, around 11 p.m. So I know we were there, and we waited for quite some time, several frantic phone calls. Well, not so much frantic phone calls at that stage, but several phone calls went unanswered.
By late on Sunday afternoon, when Ross failed to arrive back in Wollongong to read the Sunday night news bulletin, Craig went to the police.
Now it's 48 hours or whatever, and the guy hasn't turned up, and tried to see if there was something more they could do. And I think at that time they asked us some questions and made some notes, but they didn't really show any sign of doing anything about it.
Craig and his partner Paul filled out a missing persons report. Then they decided to do some sleuthing for themselves. And after hearing from Philip that Ross headed east on Friday night, they drove out to Bondi.
And we turned up at Marks Park, and his car was parked up the top of the cliffs. So as soon as we saw his car on that Sunday evening, that's when, again, we really thought, well, something's not right here.
In Queensland, Ross's mother tried to call her son at Win TV and was told he hadn't shown up for work. The next day, she contacted police and discovered that his car had been found. She and Ross's father immediately made plans to fly to Sydney. On Monday, Craig and Paul returned to Bondi.
I think we probably called the police in the morning and said, well, what happens now? And they said, well, they didn't really say that they were going to do a lot, so we thought, well, we'll go and have a look and see if we can find something.
They began knocking on doors of nearby residents, but no one had seen their friend. They searched Marks Park and the surrounding area.
Walked around the top of the cliffs to see if we could see anything and couldn't find anything. And then I think just as we were about to leave, we saw something shining down at the bottom of the cliffs, sitting on the rocks. And so we found a way to get down to the bottom of the cliff and found that this was actually Ross's keys, just popped into underneath the lip of a ledge.
Craig reported the discovery of the keys, and police then began searching the area and interviewing local residents. Newspapers and TV news bulletins were soon running with reports that Ross Warren was missing.
The fact that a person with a profile had disappeared under such mysterious circumstances fueled quite a media frenzy.
His boss at Win TV News told reporters that it was the first time in 4 years that Ross had failed to turn up for work. Friends declared Ross had been happy and looking forward to new career opportunities in Sydney, and they confirmed his disappearance was totally out of character.
You don't have somebody busily working on their show reel, getting ready with the possibility of earning, not only of being seen nationally, but earning a little bit more money as well. You don't have somebody spending their time doing that when they're suddenly going to either stage their disappearance or, heaven forbid, take their own life.
Hello, I'm Jane Singleton and this is a toothpaste commercial.
When he went missing though, everybody was, saying, oh, he's got to have done himself. No way. There's absolutely no way that boy would have harmed himself.
They did a total fingerprinting of his apartment. It was dusted from top to bottom. They did a forensics. It was a much more professional investigation of a crime scene or potential crime scene than was the case in Sydney, where they had cars, keys as evidence.
A check of Ross's bank accounts showed they'd not been accessed. Police then closed the file and the Ross Warren case was left in limbo. In the winter of 1989, television newsreader Ross Warren disappeared from a clifftop park near Sydney's famous Bondi beach. In May 2000, more than 10 years later, the eyes of the world were about to turn to Sydney as host of the Olympic Games. In his office at Paddington Police Station in Sydney's eastern suburbs, Detective Stephen Page picked up a file marked Ross Warren. On the top was an emotional letter from Ross Warren's mother, Kay, pleading for police to close the case and admit her son was dead.
And she hadn't had any coronial inquest, no finding of death, no death certificate, and she wanted to put his matters to rest, try and get some degree of closure. But when I saw her letter, she'd attached to it numerous other letters where she'd made similar pleas. You had the feel of a frustrated mother, and I felt for her. I suppose I made a commitment then and there to, there'd be no more letter writing from Kay Warren, that we'd start something off and we'd give her closure of that matter.
The detective was intrigued to find that Ross Warren's death was officially regarded as accidental, and his file had simply been closed. It had not even been sent to the Missing Persons Unit.
From the documents that I've read, initial police beliefs were that, perhaps he was there and he's, slipped or fallen off the cliff and gone out to sea, and it was basically a non-suspicious death. It was just an accident.
The detective delved further into the file and noticed a number of errors and anomalies. He realised that if he was to find out anything useful, he would have to start from scratch.
There'd never been a brief of evidence prepared for the coroner in relation to his death. So with that, there's no statements available. It was almost as if I was starting the investigation afresh. There was nothing to run with. It wasn't a fresh homicide where you had physical evidence, you had witnesses, you had motives, you had suspects. In the early days, I really had to fight hard.
The detective wondered why basic police procedures had not been followed. Why, for example, were Ross's keys and his car not fingerprinted?
Certainly, there probably could have been a little bit more that could have been done with the Ross Warren investigation, as far as interviewing locals, statements from police, canvassing witnesses and residents of the area.
The detective sought out police who'd worked on the Ross Warren investigation. Surprisingly, several of those listed as having worked on the case told him they'd had little or no involvement. Page expanded his inquiries and suddenly came across details of another mysterious death of a gay man. John Allen Russell, at the same location and around the same time. John Russell was Bondi born and bred. The streets of Bondi were his world, and he was well known and liked by the locals.
He was just very open and happy. He used to enjoy life. Had a very big circle of friends and used to enjoy their company as well.
As he matured, John realised he was gay. After leaving school, he took on casual work as a barman.
Not just gay clubs on Oxford Street that he worked in over the years, but various venues in the city and at Bondi. He was low-key, not a person given to depression or moods. He was popular. He had lots of mates and a very loving family.
Well, Johnny was just one of those bright sparks that everybody likes. He's just he sort of oozed laughter. Loved to joke, loved to laugh, and always shout at people. Just a people's person.
John was 31 when he inherited $100,000 from his grandfather, and he immediately made plans to move to the country. He was excited about the prospect of a new life and soon began packing up and saying goodbye to friends.
Yeah, all right, see ya. Bye.
On the night of November 22nd, 1989, John had a few farewell drinks at the Bondi Hotel with one of his closest mates.
Got to the point where it was about 10:30 or whatever, and I called it quits and said, right, I'll see you tomorrow. And for him to get back to Peter's new flat would have been 800 yards to the north. I just left and said goodbye and see you tomorrow night.
Now, John, being a Bondi boy, he knew it was a beat. He wasn't a great patron of beats. He'd occasionally been to them, but it was by no means a regular pastime of his. For reasons that we perhaps will never know, whether it was just a very warm, balmy evening, a few beers in his belly, whatever, kind of maybe his own kind of way of saying goodbye to Bondi, he walked to the headland.
It was just 3 months since Ross Warren disappeared from the same area.
G'day, mate. What's going on? Not much, mate. What are you doing?
I want your wallet.
You're kidding, aren't you, mate?
No, mate, I'm not, you dirty cook.
You have here before I give you a flogging.
Over the cliff. Go. Come on, you bastard. Let go. Get it up. Get it up, you bastard. Get it up.
The following morning, a jogger saw a bloodied body lying on the rock shelf. Police were called and they found a cigarette pack containing John Russell's keycard. The next morning, John's brother, Peter, was taken by police to the morgue to identify the body.
My first immediate reaction, and everybody I know's immediate reaction, was this isn't suicide. You know, you're about to come into $100,000. You've got plans, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're going to go on a holiday to Queensland, you've got all these other things you're going to do. You don't go and jump off the rocks at Marks Park and kill yourself.
I knocked on the door at Oakley Road and was informed in the doorway that John was dead. So a bit upset, of course, and then I started trying to find out what was going on, what was happening, what was happening with investigations, and we went down to the Bondi police station, and they told us virtually nothing.
Reading the reports of John's death 10 years later, Steve Page was intrigued by the extensive nature of the injuries. John had suffered a fractured skull, ribs and clavicle, broken arms and legs, and extensive abrasions. He also had a torn lip and a large gash above his eye and bruising on the side of his body that had been unaffected by the fall. But it was not enough to state definitively that he was bashed.
Sometimes it can be difficult if there's facial injuries from an assault and you also fall heavily onto your face, then naturally there may be an overlap with those injuries, but I didn't find anything that I felt strongly about to indicate that he'd been assaulted and then pushed over the cliff.
John had multiple injuries, and the thing is, whenever anyone falls from a cliff at height, that can mask any evidence of a physical assault. So, and you can't differentiate. Well, that's from an assault. That's from a fall, because it's all blunt force injuries that he's got.
The police report noted that John was gay and that gangs were known to attack gay men in the area, but it didn't mention the unusual position of the body. John was found with his legs facing out to sea. That suggests he'd been pushed backwards off the cliff.
We know that bodies do bounce when they impact with a hard surface, but I don't think that would have been just enough to move the body quite a considerable distance from, say, head pointing outwards away from the cliff to 180 degrees pointing towards the cliff.
Because it was pretty much a straight drop. There wasn't too much to bounce off on the way down, so how do you get that far out without either A, taking a running jump, and there wasn't room to do that, there was only a pathway and the edge, so it was either pushed or thrown.
Another clue to suggest a struggle is the fact that John's jersey appeared to have been forcibly pulled halfway up his torso. And most damning of all, the crime scene photos clearly showed a clump of hair stuck to John's hand.
And I remember when I saw John in at Glebe, he had the hairs. There's photographs of him, and he's still got the hairs in his hand, which made me immediately believe, well, he hasn't jumped because he's got someone's hair in his hand.
The hairs looked somewhat different from the hairs of John Russell's head that were on John Russell's head. And naturally, of course, you're thinking about involvement of another person or persons when that sort of thing does occur.
Detective Page tried to locate the hair, but it had been lost. Another mystery was that there's no record of John's clothes being subjected to a thorough scientific examination.
So we still don't know if such an examination was done or not.
The Bondi police evidently washed all his clothes, strangely enough, and dressed up a dummy and put out at the front of the police station with, it's in Wairau Avenue, asking for anybody who may have seen anything or heard anything to get in touch with the police.
The coroner's inquest into John Russell's death lasted just 35 minutes. The conclusion was death by misadventure.
This was a rather surprising conclusion at this time, because there had been a number of bashings at the scene. Now, the fact that John had a high degree of alcohol in his system was reason enough, seemingly, for them to write off his death as being accidental.
Well, straight away I thought it was a load of rubbish. The police, as far as I knew, were evidently trying to sweep the whole thing under the carpet, because in those days, as you know, being gay was not permitted, you know, not accepted, not as it is today.
Do I look like I'm kidding you, dirty queer? Get out of here before I give you a flogging!
And having seen John's body in the casket and read the coroner's report on the injuries that he'd sustained, there was just no doubt that he'd been flogged in an atrocious way repeatedly and probably then thrown over the cliff.
It's the winter of 1990, 8 months after John Russell's death.
You should have seen this guy as being a maddest dickhead, so Keno just smacked the poof in the back of his head and we just took all his shit.
On Friday night, July 20th, on the path above Bondi Cliffs, 3 young thugs were smoking drugs and drinking.
There was a bit of cash in there, we just split it up. But like, there'll be more cash out here, that's why we're here.
They were Matthew Davis, Shaun McAuliffe and his brother, David McAuliffe.
That's what we come out here for, this is where the good money is. All around here,
The mood was angry. They were spoiling for a fight.
Let's just smash these down and we'll go smash them.
We should just finish these beers up, head out, find the first lot of them we see.
Oh, they give me the shits, man. Oh.
On nearby Campbell Parade, the main boulevard on Bondi Beach, 31-year-old Thai student Kritchakorn Ratana Jarathaporn left the restaurant where he worked as a dishwasher. He'd only been in Australia 4 months, but as a gay man, he'd already found more acceptance than in his home country.
He got a job as a kitchen hand in Bondi to support himself, was living by himself in a small apartment, but had decided that Australia was going to be the place where he would stay. His family didn't know about his sexuality. He kept it very firmly under wraps for obvious reasons when you come from a sort of traditional kind of strict upbringing.
Instead of going home to his small Bondi flat, he wandered up to the cliff tops where he met another man, Jeffrey Sullivan.
Been up here before?
No, it's my first time.
You live around here?
I live in Bondi. I work in Bondi too.
Oh.
Yeah.
The two were sitting on a rock ledge talking when they suddenly heard footsteps and saw a gang of youths approaching. But they were trapped against the cliff.
Use your jacket and your money! I'll kill you! Hurry up! Come on!
Jeffrey was bashed with a claw hammer and fell to the ground, gushing blood. Shaun McAuliffe jumped on his head and kicked him in the stomach, spleen and kidneys. Kritchakorn broke free.
Go on then, Matty. Go get the little princess.
And staggered down the path. But he was quickly caught, and Shaun McAuliffe then started swinging his hammer.
Get a little fairy. Go again. Give another one.
These Asian homos are tough little pricks.
Bleeding and dazed, Kritchakorn staggered away towards the cliff and then saw Matthew Davis approaching him with a stick.
Oh, yeah. Jesus, man, he didn't even have to touch it.
Well, let's go. It's pretty soft.
Jeff Sullivan was left still breathing and gravely injured. He would lie unconscious on the path until the next morning, when he'd be found by tourists. and soon afterwards, in the sea below, police divers would locate Critchacorn's mangled body.
It was an incredibly vicious attack. It's hard to imagine, outside of watching a horror film, the scale of these kind of injuries that a human being takes from being systematically hit with a claw hammer and being dragged along rocks and bashed against rock faces and so forth. Critchacorn, Ratana Girathaporn's injuries were absolutely horrendous.
This time, no one could dismiss the case as an accident. This time, there was blood and a survivor. A month later, the three killers were arrested, and a friend's mother heard them boasting about bashing a Chinaman.
She overheard this conversation between them and her son. She had read the story in the newspapers at the time. She put two and two together and called the police.
The McAuliffe brothers and Matthew Davis were tried and convicted. The brothers were sentenced to a minimum of 12 years in jail, and Davis got a minimum of 11. Detective Page now moved on to the story told by another survivor of another attack at the cliff tops around the same time. He was a Bondi restaurant waiter who was able to tell police exactly how his attackers dragged him towards the cliff.
One of them had a stick.
He recounted his absolute terror when he heard a voice saying, "Let's throw him off where we threw the other one off."
And that's when I just ran.
He was crying, he was screaming for help. There's units nearby, and a resident of a nearby unit came out on their balcony and screamed out words to the effect of, "We don't help poofters."
And I heard the voice and seen the light come on, but that was all.
The victim later attended Waverley Police Station and from file mugshots picked out the man he alleged was the ringleader in the attack. The face he allegedly identified was that of Shaun Lee Cushman, a violent local thug with a string of offences to his name. Cushman was well known to police as a leader of a gang calling themselves the Bondi Boys. Detective Sergeant Page then came across a connection between Cushman and the McAuliffe brothers. 7 months before David McAuliffe was convicted of Critchacorn's murder, he and Cushman were questioned over another gay bashing.
Jesus, man, you didn't even have to touch it.
Shaun Cushman later made headlines when he was sentenced to a good behaviour bond after aiding and abetting a fellow thug, Aaron Martin, in the notorious bashing death of British tourist Brian Hagland in a Bondi street. Detective Page now wanted to know, did Shaun Cushman, David McAuliffe or the gang members who followed them know something about what happened to Ross Warren?
Run!
As he compiled details of more and more attacks on gay men, Detective Steve Page was now realising the full horror of what he was uncovering.
So he started joining the dots. And when he started joining the dots, he was smelling something that was the stuff of a major investigation.
Go on then, Matty. Go get the little princess.
It was now clear to Page that in the late 1980s and early 1990s, a bloody gay hate bashing and murder spree had taken place across inner Sydney. January 1987, 43-year-old technician Raymond Keem is bashed to death in Allison Park, Randwick. The murder is unsolved. December 1988. Former schoolteacher William Allen was bashed and stabbed with a screwdriver in Alexandria Park. The murder is unsolved. January 1990, office worker Richard Johnson was bashed to death by a gang of 8, also at Alexandria Park. 3 youths were convicted of murder and 5 of manslaughter. May 1990, schoolteacher Wayne Tonks was murdered in his flat. Teenagers Ben Andrew and Peter Kane were later convicted of the killing. April 1991. Ballet technician Maurice John McCarty was bashed to death in his Newtown home. 19-year-old Christopher McKinnon was convicted of the murder, and despite boasting to friends he's just rolled a fag, he was acquitted on appeal using the controversial homosexual advance panic defence. August 1992. The body of 58-year-old Clark Cyril Olsen was found washed up at Rushcutters Bay on Sydney Harbour. The murder is unsolved.
So it was horrendous and very, very violent, against gays back in that era. And with the violence against gays, it wasn't one-on-one. We were talking, the victims were often on their own at best too, but they were up against a gang, and these offenders, cowardly attacks, often with weapons, and no remorse, and it was just an absolute blood sport.
After many months of compiling all the evidence, the detective now realised it would take a major task force to fully investigate Ross Warren's disappearance and the death of John Russell. First, he had to convince his superiors to provide the resources needed to reopen cases which were not only 10 years old, but not even officially designated as murders. In the case of Ross Warren, he didn't even have a body.
One thing I looked at with Ross Warren was why his body didn't reappear. If it's gone into the ocean, why wasn't it washed up?
If somebody drowns close to the beach, yes, the body will probably come back to shore, but once you're seaward, it's very, very difficult. And I think bodies will resurface eventually, and that's often when they're found. But if they're stuck along the coastline rocks, they can get trapped and might not come up at all.
In the end, it wasn't the Ross Warren case, but evidence from the John Russell death that got the wider investigation approved.
And what got me over the line was speaking with a forensic pathologist, Alan Carler. I spoke with him, I gave him photographs of the John Russell crime scene, and he was of the same view as myself, that John Russell didn't go off that cliff forwards. It was a backwards motion fall off the cliff.
I believe that there were good indicators that foul play had occurred with involving John Russell's death, that it didn't look like a straightforward suicide by jumping from a height, and that there were elements of foul play that needed to be further explored.
Page was given the go-ahead to set up Operation Taradale. As well as a full team of detectives, he was allowed to call on the wider powers of the state's top crime-fighting body.
And what I did, also put forward a case to the New South Wales Crime Commission. And the Crime Commission is a secret body. It's got coercive powers. It's got a lot of investigative support that it can offer police. And I needed to tap into that with what I planned.
One of Critchacorn's killers, Matthew Davis, confessed that he and the McAuliffes had bashed at least a dozen other gay men at inner Sydney parks. Davis says the brothers boasted of throwing another gay man off the Bondi cliffs.
Page knew there must be more witnesses to be found, others who'd been attacked but who had not reported it at the time. He decided to ramp up the publicity and attract TV news coverage of the investigation by staging a reenactment of John Russell's fall.
We had a dummy that was thrown off the cliff, and it was filmed and it hit mainstream media.
Okay, go.
Today, an unusual reenactment. Police using a dummy to help them work out, did he jump or was he pushed? Police now suspect the death and Ross Warren's disappearance can be linked and that both were victimised for being gay.
Looking at doing the reenactment, we're hoping to bring witnesses forward. Now what we had, instead of, we got witnesses, but we also got another deceased.
One witness came forward to tell Page about the sudden and mysterious disappearance in 1985 of Gilles Mattiani, a gay Frenchman living in Sydney who often walked along the cliffs at Bondi. Although it was some years earlier, Page added Mattiani to the list. Other witnesses came forward to outline attacks they'd suffered, and slowly, inexorably, Page believed he could piece together what must have happened to Ross Warren on the cliff tops at Bondi that night. The detective postulates that Ross was confronted by a pack of vicious young men.
What are you doing here, you poofter?
Just out for a walk.
Oh, yeah. Give us your wallet.
I don't have
Get
any
him.
money.
Hello, honey. Come on. Give it us.
Come on, mate.
Give it up, faggot.
Come on, you big
Put him on the ground. Put him on the ground. Faggot.
Come on.
Who then surrounded him and attacked.
Get the shit out of here.
Here he goes.
Like many gay bashings, it lasted a long time. For this was not a simple robbery, this was blood sport, where the aim was to vent hatred, to punish and inflict pain.
See this thing can fly. Get him over the cliff. Get him up. Come on. Get his leg. Come on.
Over here.
Get him over here.
Yeah, it's a good spot.
Dump him in.
All right, let's get him off. See ya. Shit. Bastard's left his keys here. You been in these, gorgeous? Let's get out of here.
Ross's friends will later find his keys tucked in a rock cavity under a ledge, possibly left there by a passing tourist or fisherman who picked them up and placed them clear of the water. Now that a clear picture has emerged of the terrible wave of murders and bashings of gay men that had been occurring across inner Sydney 10 years earlier, the next step is to track down the culprits. Page's team then began interviewing more than 30 persons of interest, including members of the gang convicted of killing technician Richard Johnson in Alexandria Park. One, Adam French, was secretly recorded in prison boasting about throwing gay men off the cliffs at Bondi. But he refused to be interviewed or to cooperate with Taradale detectives. Two others convicted of the Johnson killing, Mark Church and Ron Morgan, denied taking part in any other attacks. Adam French, Mark Church and Ron Morgan have not been charged with any of the Bondi murders. Members of other gangs either refused to talk or simply denied any involvement in any of the attacks. After 3 years of digging, Page and his team had compiled an impressive brief for the coroner. Operation Taradale compiled more than 3,000 pages of witness testimonies, surveillance, phone tap transcripts and police reports. The inquest opened in March 2003 before Deputy New South Wales Coroner Jacqueline Millage and lasted 6 months. the various former gang members filed through the witness box and repeated their denials of any involvement in the bashings and killings. With no corroborating evidence, it was impossible so long after the crimes to be able to positively identify the murderers. When Millage handed down her findings, she praised Page's team for its work, but delivered a blistering broadside of criticism at the original investigating police. She described the earlier police work on the Warren case as grossly, quote, shameful, inadequate and naive. She found conclusively that Ross Warren and John Russell had both died as a result of foul play and described the gang members as cowardly and boastful brutes. They hunted in packs and their victims had little hope of defending themselves.
Get him, put him on the ground. Come on, give it up, Paul. Like that, you big bag. Oh, you mince and press.
This investigation, it was big. Did take a long time, but it wasn't a one-man show. I had a team of investigators that worked with me as a group. Very proud. Certainly, I was motivated, trying to get the right results for the family. But hopefully they fed off that. But they were an extremely motivated group of guys and girls. And I wouldn't have been able to achieve the proof of evidence without their support.
The coroner was unable to say conclusively what happened to Gilles Mattiani in 1985, but she said there was a strong possibility that he died in similar circumstances to the other men. Steve Page and his team have been hailed as heroes for finally showing what happened to Ross Warren and John Russell. Meanwhile, the cases continue to be investigated because the killers still walk free among us, and someone, somewhere, knows who they are.
Do I look like I'm kidding you, shirt lifter?
Well, I just hope there's somebody out there brave enough and sensible enough to realise what the consequences of that group's actions that night and on many other occasions, what impact it's had on people's lives, friends and family. I just hope that one of them can find it within themselves to come clean about it and let us know who was responsible.
I'm sure being 19 years down the track now, those people have got children, and with any luck, their children will be gay. And then how are they going to feel when their son comes home and says, look, Dad, I'm gay? What's he going to do? Grab him and throw him off a cliff?
Get it out! Come on, get him!
Or is he going to sit down and it'll play with his mind till the day he dies?
I'm confident that sooner or later that the people involved in this will have their day in court. And I'm asking any witnesses in the deaths of Ross Warren and John Russell to come forward now rather than be a witness now as opposed to being a defendant further down the track.
You don't really ever get over. You put it away for a while and then something happens. A birthday, Christmas, things like this show come along and out it comes again. It's like the box of everything that's over there. It hasn't been out now since 2005. It's not as simple as closing that box up and putting that back in the cupboard and saying, OK, well, that's it, it's gone away again. It doesn't, it stays. It stays for quite a while.
Certainly from Ross's point of view, he had so much to give to the world, and the fact that his sexuality was the reason why he was murdered is just horrific, just wrong in every conceivable level. And the fact that somebody in our police force kept going to make sure that he didn't die in vain, I think is really important.
And that night he came back up and he waited to get my eye, and it was obvious that, and I kept looking over at him, expecting him just to say, have a good weekend, whatever. And he stood there, and I was aware of it, and I looked over and got his eye, and he said, goodbye. And that goodbye has haunted me. all these years.
There's a very simple reason why all these young men were killed. It wasn't because they were targets for robbery. It wasn't because they were involved with crime themselves. It wasn't because they were looking for trouble. They were killed because they were gay.
It's now believed there were hundreds, possibly thousands, of assaults against gay men during this era. Many of those labelled as murder, accidental death or suicide are now regarded as possible gay hate crimes and remain unsolved. One of the most publicised cases is the death of gay American mathematician, 27-year-old Scott Johnson. His naked, battered body was found at the base of a 60-metre cliff at North Head in Sydney Harbour in 1988.
On the first day of his death, the police had surmised that it was a suicide. Within a few months, Coroner Derek Hand agreed with them and it was found to be a suicide.
Incredibly, in dismissing Scott's death as suicide, the police told the inquest that North Head was not a gay beat because no one had reported any bashings there.
For every murder, what we do know is there were hundreds, if not thousands, of gay bashings. And gay men at the time, sometimes because they hadn't come out, sometimes because they didn't trust police, for whatever reason, they often didn't report the crimes.
Scott's wealthy brother, Steve, came to Australia and hired a private investigator to research Scott's death and pursued a relentless 12-year-long campaign to pressure authorities to find the truth.
He got a second inquest into Scott's death, which threw out the suicide finding. This was in 2012, threw out the suicide finding and made an open finding.
More investigation and pressure from Steve Johnson led to a third inquest into his brother's death.
Only the Azaria Chamberlain case has had more coronial attention.
Coroner Michael Barnes found that Scott had indeed been murdered and criticised the initial police investigation as inadequate, saying they had quickly jumped to conclusions without thoroughly and impartially examining all the facts. The role of police has always loomed large in the issue of gay bashing. Memories are still strong of police officers bashing and drowning Dr. George Duncan in Adelaide's Torrens River in the early 1970s, and of the bashing of the first Sydney gay Mardi Gras marchers in the old Darlinghurst police station cells in 1978. Rick Fennelly gives a chilling account of a police attack in 1988 when a friend named Paul Symes witnessed an horrific assault in Sydney's Moore Park. Symes called 000 to report the assault and gave them the attacker's car number plate.
Some weeks later, Paul Symes is contacted and called into a meeting at police headquarters with some top brass, people with some serious seniority, and is advised that the car he reported was an unmarked police car. So what we know to this day is that 4 policemen in their plain clothes, and since then what I've established is that at the time, not all police, but some police were involved in a bit of poofta bashing for sport.
One victim, Sydney man Ron Harmer, recalls the horror of being bashed at Randwick in Sydney's east and the attitude of the police who witnessed it.
I lost conscious. I came to, and there was a man standing over me that had a handgun, and he had the handgun pointed at me and absolutely freaked out. I didn't know who the man was. I didn't know if he was part of the group that were chasing me. I didn't know if he was going to shoot me or what he was going to do. And I muttered something, I don't remember what, but I remember him saying to me, "Calm down, I'm a police officer." They admitted to me that they'd sat in the car just up the road from where I had been bashed unconscious and watched me get bashed.
The New South Wales Police continue to investigate the crimes, and the latest initiative is named Operation Parabel. large rewards are in place to encourage anyone who has information to come forward and help bring closure to victims' families. So far, no one has had the courage to speak up.